They told you to be kind, to be available, to always pick up the phone, even when your hands were trembling, to say yes, even when your chest screamed no, to understand everyone, even when no one understood you. They told you this was strength, but they lied. The truth, being endlessly available is not a virtue. It is self-abandonment dressed as kindness. You give, and give, and give, until there's nothing left of you but the smile they expect to see. But there comes a day, a silent, almost sacred moment, when something inside you breaks or awakens. A quiet voice says, "No more." And when you stop being available, everything changes. The world shifts. Not because it suddenly became kind, but because you stopped making yourself an open wound for others to walk through. Your silence is noticed. Your absence is louder than any cry. And the ones who once clung to your presence, they start to panic. Not because they miss you, but because they can no longer use you. Carl Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves." But when you become inaccessible, it's not you who gets irritated. It's them. They poke. They provoke. They call you cold, distant, selfish. But what they're really saying is, "You've stopped serving the role I gave you." And that's where your liberation begins. You're not becoming colder. You're becoming sovereign. You're not withdrawing from life. You're returning to yourself. Because the more you explain, justify, defend, the more you disappear. Every yes that betrayed your truth, every rushed reply that drowned your peace, those were not small sacrifices. They were pieces of your soul, chipped away quietly. And now, you're done being functional. You're done being the emotional emergency button people press and put back. You've spent years thinking your value came from being needed. But the cruel truth is, what's always available becomes invisible. What's predictable gets used. What doesn't cost anything is never truly respected. So pause and ask yourself, who deserves your presence? Better yet, who deserves your absence? Because silence is not the absence of love. It's the presence of self-worth. It's the refusal to bleed for people who wouldn't even hand you a bandage. You are not here to be their mirror. You are here to be whole. And sometimes, that begins with becoming unavailable. There's something terrifying about becoming unavailable, especially when your whole identity was built on being there for everyone else. The guilt kicks in. You feel selfish. You hear the voices, external and internal. Why are you like this now? You've changed. Who do you think you are? But listen closely. That's not truth. That's resistance. Not yours. Theirs. Because when you stop reacting, stop explaining, stop rescuing, you break the unspoken contract. The agreement where you keep bleeding so they can feel whole. But now the rules are different. You're not cold. You're clear. You're not absent. You're present for yourself. And those who never really saw you, only what you gave, they begin to show their true faces. Have you noticed? The ones who once praised your loyalty, they disappear when you say no. The ones who begged for your time, get angry when you value your space. And the ones who said, "I need you," never actually asked, "How are you?" because they were never connecting with you, only with the version of you that was easy to use. Carl Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to survive, to be accepted, to avoid being alone. But the persona is not you. It's your performance. And when you start to peel it away, when you stop responding just to keep the peace, you'll see it. Who was loving you and who was using you. This process, Jung called it individuation. It's not comfortable. It's not pretty. It's not applauded. It's lonely. It's slow. It's sacred. Because it's the death of who you were told to be, and the birth of who you truly are. But you need to understand something. The people who are threatened by your silence were never nourished by your presence. They were fed by your exhaustion, by your need to please, by your fear of losing them. And now that you're not afraid to walk away, they panic, not because they lost someone valuable, but because they lost control. You are not their mirror anymore. You are not their savior, their therapist, their escape. You are a boundary. And for the first time, you're no longer explaining that. You're no longer asking permission to protect your energy. You're just doing it. Because true power is quiet. It doesn't beg. It doesn't shout. It doesn't prove. It just leaves the room. And suddenly, everything feels different. Not because they changed, but because you finally did. But here's the paradox. The moment you finally choose yourself, the moment you begin to protect your peace, your time, your silence, is the same moment you start to lose what was never truly yours. And that hurts. It hurts when people you once called home no longer feel safe with your truth. It hurts when the room gets quieter, not because it's peaceful, but because so many left when you stopped performing. You thought setting boundaries would feel empowering, and it does, but not at first. At first, it feels like abandonment. Not theirs, yours. Because for so long, your worth was built on sacrifice, being the reliable one, the healer, the helper, the one who showed up, even when it cost you your soul. And now, you're sitting in the silence that follows your first honest no. It's unfamiliar. It's echoing. But wait. Don't run from it. Don't rush to fill it. Because that silence, that emptiness, it's not a void, it's a doorway. Jung said, "We don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This silence is your darkness becoming conscious. The emptiness you feel right now isn't loneliness. It's spaciousness. It's the room you never had, because others were always taking up space inside you. And as painful as it is, this is where the real shift happens. Because something strange begins to occur when you no longer react. The people who once dictated your emotions, they lose their grip. The manipulations that once triggered guilt, they dissolve. Why? Because you're no longer playing the part. You've stepped off their stage. You've stopped performing in the drama they wrote without your consent. And the moment you do that, you stop being predictable. You stop being useful, and that terrifies them, because they can't provoke what no longer flinches. They can't guilt-trip what no longer explains. They can't control what no longer responds. You've become untouchable, not because you've built walls, but because you've stopped offering access. Your peace is no longer up for negotiation. Your time is no longer a free-for-all. Your soul is no longer currency. And the irony? The very people who once drained you will now accuse you of being heartless. But that's just their grief over losing the version of you that tolerated too much. Let them grieve, because your rebirth was never meant to make them comfortable. And now comes the real test, the quiet, the long nights where no one checks in, the days where your phone doesn't ring because you stopped being the one who always reaches out. At first, it feels like loss, like something is being taken from you. But lean in, look closer. This is not something being taken. This is something returning. You, your energy, your breath, your center. Carl Jung taught that the psyche must pull back from the collective to find its true shape. And that's exactly what's happening here. You're no longer wrapped in other people's noise. And for the first time in your life, you can finally hear your own voice. Do you feel it? That stillness inside? It's uncomfortable, yes, but it's also sacred. This is the solitude of the strong, not the absence of others, but the presence of you. No more running, no more explaining, no more editing yourself to fit into rooms you were never meant to be in. You're not becoming distant, you're becoming real. And those who only knew the version of you who always said yes, they won't recognize this version. They'll say you're different, harder, colder. Let them. Because this difference, this edge, it's the armor you grew from your own bones, not to keep love out, but to keep self-betrayal in check. You've learned the cost of pleasing. You've memorized the price of availability, and you're no longer willing to pay it in peace. You've stopped fighting for seats at tables that required you to starve yourself. Now, you eat alone, not out of bitterness, but out of reverence. You no longer beg for scraps. You are rebuilding your feast. And as this power grows, something else falls away. The fear of being misunderstood, the fear of disappointing, the fear of rejection. Because now you understand. Being misunderstood is not a punishment. It's proof that you've stopped living on other people's terms. And yes, it's isolating. But there's something beautiful about being alone and finally feeling safe. No more monitoring your words. No more shrinking your truth. No more swallowing your intuition. This silence isn't the end. It's the soil. And from it, something sacred will grow. But only if you stay. Only if you don't run back to noise. Only if you let the emptiness do its work. So breathe. You are not lost. You are just in the space where old versions of you have died, and the real one is just beginning to awaken. And now, the awakening begins. It doesn't look dramatic. There's no applause, no bright light from the sky. It's subtle, soft, like a breath returning to a body that forgot what it felt like to inhale peace. It begins when you no longer explain your absence, when you no longer feel the need to prove your worth through your suffering. It begins when silence becomes your sanctuary, not your punishment. Carl Jung once said, "Solitude is not the absence of love, but its complement, because only when we are alone can we meet ourselves." And that's what this is. Not isolation, not rejection, but reunion. You are coming home to the version of you that doesn't perform, doesn't chase, doesn't bend to be chosen. The one who exists simply without needing permission. It's strange at first to live without the noise, without the emotional turbulence you once mistook for connection. But in that stillness, you begin to see you are whole. Not because someone said you were, but because you stopped giving your wholeness away in pieces. You stopped being the echo and became the voice. And yes, you lost people along the way. But did you really lose them? Or did you simply release the ones who only stayed when you forgot yourself? You didn't lose them. You found the truth. And the truth is this: anyone who is offended by your boundaries was only ever comfortable with your betrayal. And now that you've stopped betraying yourself, you're untouchable. Not because pain doesn't reach you, but because it no longer roots inside you. Not because you've stopped feeling, but because you've stopped leaking. Your energy, once scattered across 1,000 unfinished conversations, unspoken resentments, unnecessary apologies, has come back. And with it, your clarity, your presence, your power. You don't speak as much now because you understand. Every word is an offering. Every sentence is an investment. And not everyone deserves access to your truth. So you choose carefully. You move slowly. You love deeply. But only where love is safe. This is what it means to be sovereign. To no longer need to be needed. To no longer mistake your usefulness for your value. To know that even if no one claps, even if no one understands, even if you stand completely alone, you are enough. This is not the end. It's the beginning. The beginning of a life where your peace is your home, your silence is your power, and your soul is finally your own. Let the world call it distance. Let them call it cold. You know the truth. It's freedom. And you paid for it with every version of yourself that forgot your name.